Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us here today. My name is Karen Elam. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. It's my pleasure to introduce now Leslie Dannon Rosenthal, who is the chair of JCPA's Board of Directors, and she will set the stage for why we're all here today. Leslie?
Thank you so much, Karen, and to all who are joining us. In the 80 years since JCPA's founding, we have been at the forefront of some of the most important issues of our time: the fight for civil rights, LGBTQ rights, immigration reform, racial, economic, and criminal justice. And now, at a moment of rising anti-Semitism and broader rising hate, bigotry, and anti-democratic extremism, a strong, independent JCPA has never been more important to building bridges and mobilizing our communities for change. Today, we're excited to launch the next chapter of JCPA, informed directly by what we've heard from our partners across the country. Under the leadership of our new CEO, Amy Spitalnick, and the incredible team she's building, we're launching our new action networks focused on protecting our democracy and combating hate and bigotry, working hand in hand with our partners across diverse communities to mobilize, because we know that the fight for Jewish safety is inextricably linked with the safety and rights of all people and the inclusive democracy we need. In a post-October 7th world, it has never been more urgent to tell that story and to do this work. Now, we're honored to hear from one of our country's most prominent leaders in the fight against anti-Semitism. We're delighted to share this message from Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff.
Hello, everyone. As the first Second Gentleman of the United States and the first Jewish White House principal, I'm honored to be speaking to you. For 80 years, the Jewish Council for Public Affairs has been on the front lines of the fight for Jewish values, civil rights, and an inclusive society. Today, JCPA's work is more urgent than ever. Right now, there is a crisis of anti-Semitism in our nation, and this should matter to all of us. Hate against one group fuels hate against others. That is why building solidarity and broad-based coalitions is so important. 1 year ago, the Biden-Harris administration announced the first ever national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. The fourth pillar of the strategy focuses on building cross-community solidarity and taking collective action against hate. As part of my work, I've been traveling across the country and world, meeting with local leaders, organizations, to form partnerships across diverse communities and faiths. It's critical that Jewish and non-Jewish leaders work together to fight back against extremism. That is how we'll beat this epidemic of hate. JCPA's new action networks will help to strengthen allyship and ensure a safe, inclusive future for all. By mobilizing Jewish organizations, along with non-Jewish allies and partners, we can build resilience in the face of rising anti-Semitism and hate. So thank you to Amy Spitalnick and Leslie Dannon Rosenthal, JCPA, and to all the partners here today who have joined in this critical fight. Your work is so crucial in this perilous and challenging moment. I want you to know that President Biden and Vice President Harris and the entire Biden-Harris administration are with you and that we have your back. Thank you.
Today, we're excited to announce the launch of JCPA's Action Networks, a new chapter of our work, bringing together leaders, organizations, and communities committed to the goals of combating bigotry and defending our democracy. At a time when our country seems more divided than ever, we need a new strategic approach to community relations, one that will unite our collective efforts toward protecting our democracy, which is threatened by the rise in anti-Semitism, hate, and extremism. Through our action networks, we are engaging the 125 local Jewish community relations councils, national and local Jewish organizations and communities, and our allies and partners who understand that the impact of anti-Semitism extends well beyond the Jewish community animating and fueling broader extremism and hate, and that Jewish safety is most assured in inclusive, pluralistic societies where all people are safe and free. At the core of JCPA's new mandate are these two new issues-based action networks focused on protecting our inclusive democracy and combating anti-Semitism and all forms of hate and bigotry at this crucial moment.
Anti-Semitism is at historic levels in the U.S. today.
Hatred against Jews is coming from multiple directions, with violent targeting and threats against synagogues and religious institutions, with Jewish students on campus becoming increasingly concerned for their personal safety, and with politicians openly and enthusiastically embracing anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that also dehumanize marginalized groups, people with intersectional identities like immigrants, Black people, Muslims, and so many others.
In 2024, we were facing a period of resurgent anti-Semitism. We already knew before October 7th that anti-Semitism was a crisis, increasingly normalized in the form of conspiracy theories and tropes in our politics, social media, so many other spaces. And on October 7th, when we witnessed the deadliest day for the Jewish community since the Holocaust, it unleashed a new wave of anti-Semitism that's unlike anything any of us have seen in our lifetimes.
Extremists are exploiting this moment to advance zero-sum frameworks that pit our community against one another in the fight for an inclusive, pluralistic democracy.
These extremist ideas are moving closer and closer into the mainstream of our politics and society, creating divides between the Jewish community and others when it's these cross-community relationships that are so necessary for building the policies we need to counter anti-democratic extremism and keep each other safe.
If we can't overcome differences to build the coalition that we need in this moment, none of us will be safe, and the anti-democratic extremism that threatens each and every one of us will only continue to rise.
JCPA was founded in 1944 at a time of rampant anti-Semitism during the dark days of World War II and the Holocaust, because the Jewish community recognized that we were safest in deep relationship, in partnership with our neighbors, with the coalitions we needed to advocate for the policies that are inherent to Jewish safety and to all of our safety. JCPA's action networks are not only going to tell that story, but mobilize the Jewish community on the national and local levels with our partners and allies to fight for the policies that protect Jewish safety and the safety of each and every community and protect and advance our democracy. Because we know that these issues are all intertwined. We know that Jews and all communities are safest in inclusive, liberal democracies where the rights of each community is protected and where the rule of law and our fundamental democratic norms are strong. To only advance those sorts of societies by building relationships across communities, to advocate for the policies we need to reject the anti-democratic extremism, the zero-sum framework that so often pit our communities against one another, and to fight for the inclusivity and the pluralism that we know is inherent to the societies in which Jews have been most safe throughout our history. JCPA's action networks are advancing the values and the priorities that ensure all communities can live safely and freely, that all people can participate fully in our democracy.
The only path forward is together. Join us by visiting jewishpublicaffairs.org to find and share resources on how to defend democracy and counter bigotry. While you're there, sign up for updates and learn how you can take part in the work of our action networks.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Ty Gregory, and I'm proud to serve as CEO of JCRC Bay Area here on the left coast, and I'm also a proud JCPA board member. And it's now my honor to introduce Amy Spitalnick, CEO of JCPA, and Eric Ward, Executive Vice President of Race Forward. Amy Spitalnick is JCPA's Chief Executive Officer. Prior to joining JCPA, she served as Executive Director of Integrity First America, which won its groundbreaking lawsuit against the neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and hate groups responsible for the Charlottesville violence. She serves on the National Leadership Council of Bedrock and the Advisory Board of the Polarization Extremist Research Innovation Lab, PERIL, at American University, and has extensive experience in government, politics, and advocacy. I'm also a big fan, and she frequently appears in national media. Eric K. Ward, Executive Vice President of Race Forward, is a longtime civil rights strategist and nationally recognized expert on the relationship between authoritarian movements, hate violence, and preserving inclusive democracy. He's written multiple works credited with key narrative shifts, including his seminal article, Skin in the Game, How Anti-Semitism Animates White Nationalism. And in 2021, he became the first American to receive the Civil Courage Prize, revealing the dangerous proliferation of hate crimes and political violence by authoritarian and extremist movements in the United States. Welcome to both of you. And Eric, we're going to start with you. All the data tells us that we're facing a dramatic rise in anti-Semitism. That's not new to any of us here, as well as broader hate and extremism against other marginalized and intersectional communities. How are the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and bile that we're experiencing tied to other forms of bigotry and hate across our country?
Thank you. It's a great question, and it's an honor to be with you and everyone today. Look, we don't have to point to any specific group. We can look at government data coming from various institutions and civil society across the spectrum, and understand one thing. Anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim hate violence is on the rise. Hate violence doesn't come from a vacuum. And when it comes to anti-Semitism, the conspiracy theories and their deep ties to other forms of bigotry often positions Jews as a scapegoat, blaming them for societal issues, economic struggles, political uncertainties. It's more than just a prejudice against Jews, and that's what we have to hold around the centrality of anti-Semitism. It presents Jews as a powerful manipulator controlling global agendas from the shadows. And this portrayal allows other forms of hate to flourish. I often, for 30 years, I've helped communities organize against the white nationalist movement. And so I often write that it is anti-Semitism that is at the core of white nationalism. It isn't just merely one aspect, that it's so central to white nationalism that I realized early on that Black people and other marginalized groups would simply never win the fight for equity if we weren't also active in the struggle to uproot anti-Jewish hate. For me, to give this one example, 21st century white nationalists, right? Jews are cast in the same role that they've always filled for anti-Semites, as the absolute other, demon stirring a pot of lesser evils, and the driving force behind white dispossession, or what many now call the Great Replacement theory. At the foundation of that modern day movement is an explicit claim that Jews are a separate race, and that their ostensible position as white is nothing more than the greatest trick the devil ever played. For white nationalists and other anti-Semites, Jews, despite and indeed because of the fact that they are often perceived or seen as white, are placed as an enemy race that must be exposed and eliminated. It is that fantasy of invisible Jewish power that impacts other communities. For white nationalists, it explains how Black Americans, a race of supposed inferiors, could orchestrate the end of Jim Crow, or how women, feminists, the LGBT community, could upend traditional gender inequities in American society, or even how immigrants or refugees might mount successful challenges to economic inequality. When folks ask me where anti-Semitism is in the white nationalist movement, it's everywhere. When the Tree of Life shooter said Jews were committing a genocide against white people, he was using language that was intimately familiar to his fellow white nationalists. That and such rabid anti-Semitism is the framework in which the entire movement functions. It is true that all of us become victims of anti-Semitism, but what we have to understand ultimately is that white nationalists and other organized bigots tapping into anti-Semitism don't bring anti-Semitism into our communities. They merely organize the anti-Semitism that already exists. Like good organizers, they tap into the unbiased or the unconscious bias that exists in society. That is both a challenge, but also an opportunity for us to work forward by engaging community members to inoculate us from the power of anti-Semitic conspiracies.
Both disturbing and timely, given that we're entering high election season. Amy, we're going to turn it over to you. What do you see as the most troubling impact of rising anti-Semitism and bigotry today? How is it showing up in our politics and within our communities?
So grateful to everyone who's here, who's taken time to be with us during a very busy moment. And particularly grateful to my friend Eric, who I always learn from every single time we sit down together, no matter how many times. And you, Ty, for bringing us together here. We already knew anti-Semitism was a crisis long before October 7th, right? Eric talked about some of this, the increasingly normalized conspiracy theories, the tropes about Jewish control and power, the rising hate crimes, the cycle of mass violence that targets not just Jews, but so many other communities, and fundamentally our democratic norms and values, all motivated by this increasingly normalized anti-Semitic extremism. On and after October 7th, we saw this normalization of anti-Semitism really expand and accelerate in new and dangerous ways. Immediately, there were those who celebrated or denied Hamas's attack on Israel, who targeted Jews and Jewish institutions here in the United States under the guise of holding them accountable for the actions of the Israeli government. My own synagogue was targeted in October. Many folks who seized on the pain and the grief of the moment to try to pit the Jewish community against other communities in hopes of isolating and marginalizing us. And again, using a conflict on the other side of the world and many Jews' connections to Israel as a way to advance hatred against Jews here at home. And so to effectively fight anti-Semitism in all of its forms, we need to actually understand how it operates. It's easier now, perhaps less so then, but now 7 years later, easy to understand when it's a Nazi with a torch chanting "Jews will not replace us" descending on Charlottesville, or a swastika that's drawn on a synagogue, or a hate crime that targets a visibly Jewish person simply because they're Jewish. It's harder to understand anti-Semitism in the form of the insidious conspiracy theories it so often takes. Certainly in the increasingly normalized invasion and replacement rhetoric that Eric mentioned, to the Great Replacement theory, conspiracy theories related to George Soros or the Rothschilds, the globalist cabal, the protocols of the elders of Zion, effectively, QAnon. We hear this, of course, from right-wing politicians, elected officials, media, including some of the very voices who on one hand like to rail against, rightfully so, campus anti-Semitism, and on the other, advance and normalize some of the same dangerous conspiracy theories that have fueled the cycle of violence against Jews in Pittsburgh and Poway and against so many other communities. Buffalo, which we're about to mark the 2-year anniversary of, El Paso, Jacksonville, Florida, so many other places. We know that these ideas fuel and animate violence, not just against Jews, but against so many others, but also dehumanizing policies, as you mentioned, right? We see it in the targeting of women's and reproductive rights, where you hear these conspiracy theories come up when it comes in tropes around birth rates. We see it in neo-Nazis showing up to recruit at anti-LGBTQ and anti-drag events. But I also just want to be very clear about how these conspiracy theories are operating right now in a post-October 7th world. These conspiracy theories around Jewish control and power and how they're manifesting in more, left-wing spaces or conversations around Israel. Language about, quote, Jewish and Zionist control and power, efforts to hold Jews responsible for Israel's actions, as I mentioned, or as we're increasingly seeing in certain spaces, to bar, quote, Zionists from certain campuses, from certain institutions. And so when 80 to 90% of American Jews have a connection to Israel in some form, that effectively, even if we don't agree with the Israeli government, that effectively becomes a form of anti-Semitic discrimination, and all of it is meant to pit Jews against, to separate us from the very coalitions we need to be in this moment to fight the broader rising tide of hate and extremism. So if we're going to fight anti-Semitism, we need to fight it in each and every form it takes, wherever it shows up, wherever it rears its ugly head, because our safety as Jews depends on it, and because our safety is inextricably linked with the safety and rights of each and every other community and with our democracy itself. To fight bigotry and to protect democracy, we must counter anti-Semitism, and to counter anti-Semitism, we must
fight all bigotry and protect our democracy.
Here in San Francisco, we like to talk with our non-Jewish community partners about the parallels between the rise in anti-Asian hate and xenophobia with what we're experiencing, that there's this event that happened on the other side of the world that people may or may not have any connection to, that is manifesting in discrimination against us simply because we're Jewish or simply because we're Asian American, which brings me back to you, Eric, which is we've got to connect the dots across communities here. We can't turn inwards. And so how can we work across lines of difference to ensure safety for all of our communities?
I think, Amy and I are lucky enough to be able to work together regularly. I think one of the ways that we can begin, and I think this is what the action networks are setting up to do, and it's such an important moment to do. But the first thing that we can do is to move into spaces that are mature and sophisticated enough to reject the many myths that seek to divide us. As I said, Amy and I work together nearly each and every week in advancing an understanding around anti-Semitism and racism and the need to defend democracy, because we are both committed to those ideas. The idea that everyone in American society gets to live, love, worship, and work free from fear and bigotry. It's not a political position for us. That is a value forward-based understanding of how we as leaders choose to walk through the world. So the first myth that we can dispense with that allow us to build community and the necessariness of building community is to stop buying the myth that Blacks and Jews are not working together. We work together each and every day, not just in politics, but in the economy and culture across American society. Too often in that myth, we use it, right, to confirm our biases and anxieties about staying in the room together. So the first myth is retelling the Black and Jewish relationship, that there are Black and Jewish leaders in the civil rights movement and outside the civil rights movement who are committed to a society free from fear. And we ask the rest of you to join us. Other myths that I think get in the way, right, is the myth that things have not progressed in American society. I'm not here to say that things are easy here or around the world. Certainly, this is a very stressful time in our communities, inside our families, and inside our civil rights coalitions. But it's not simply just the events of October 7th that are causing that stress. It's important for us to take a long view, understanding that we have just come out of a global pandemic that took the lives of millions. COVID still ravages the world. Many of us are the survivors of environmental climate disasters that have taken place here in this country and around the world. We have watched political violence and mass shootings driven by anti-Semitism that have not only targeted the Jewish communities, such as Tree of Life, but also African-American grocery shoppers in Buffalo, New York, Latino shoppers in El Paso at a Walmart, a Gilroy Garlic Festival. In each of these cases, while not all the victims were Jews, the killers were driven by this anti-Semitic conspiracy theory called the Great Replacement Theory. I share all of these things not to scare us, but to unpack, right, the myth that we are doing our best thinking right now. The truth is that we are all under stress. The world is under stress. That means we are responding with our emotions because we are human beings. But when we are in an emotive state, we simply aren't being the most rational. And if we could shatter the myth that we are all acting rationally right now, it opens up the space for us to have a different type of conversation with one another, to hold one another accountable, to bring transparency in a way that simply doesn't exist right now, that I think the Action Network will speak to. Finally, I know I'm not here to talk hours, but I want to share one other piece that I think is important. In bridge building, why do we do it? Not just to simply address the crisis that is at hand, that is short-term thinking. We build these bridges of relationship for also the future times to come. If we only come together in crisis will be the only things that ever bring us together. And it's a hard time to have hard, complicated conversations in the midst of crisis. So we need to build a long-term commitment to building relationships across lines, race, religion, gender. We need to come in with our humility, not acting as if none of us have made mistakes in this moment. And the third is we have to dismantle the myth that we aren't already wanting to work together. When we do these things, we set ourselves apart from the rest of the world, meaning we choose to be responsible leaders in this moment. Frankly, from my perspective, as a long-time follower and intervener of anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry, too many of our leaders are leaning into the emotive sectarian moments, pandering to the worst fears and anxieties of our communities. It is one thing to acknowledge the genuine and perceived fears that a community might hold, and it's important for us to do so. It's another to pander to them because you know that you will get attention, because you know you will get volume. The truth is, it's not the job of leaders to pander. It's the job of leaders to bring forward solutions, and solutions only come together. We must understand that the impact of anti-Semitism on American society is critical, that it's not merely a left or right wing issue or conservative or liberal or Republican or Democrat. It is a moral based conversation, understanding that anti-Semitism as a linchpin holds together multiple forms of hatred. When we see groups talking about the Great Replacement theory or blaming immigrants for societal roles, there's almost always a thread connecting back to anti-Semitic myths. Understanding these connections are crucial for us to effectively challenge and dismantle the many faces of bigotry. It is important to understand that anti-Semitism is also a form of racism. It does not place Jews as a religious or ethnic other, but as a racialized other. That means that we can't fight anti-Blackness in American society without fighting anti-Semitism, and we can't fight anti-Semitism without tackling anti-Blackness. It is essential that we build these strong coalitions across different communities. We must recognize these interconnected forms of hatred and work together to challenge anti-Semitism alongside other prejudices. But we can't do that unless we come into the room. And when we come into the room together, we're going to realize one hard fact, that none of us are immune from the unconscious biases that exist in the society we already live in. Meaning, we will enter those spaces with our unconscious anti-Semitism. We will enter those spaces with our unconscious anti-Muslim biases. We will enter those spaces with our unconscious racism. But we enter those spaces recognizing we have those unconscious biases, but choosing not to allow them to define us, because there are bigger things, more important things that our communities need right now, are deserving of, that lead us in that space to move forward together so that we can create a more just and inclusive society where no one is singled out as a scapegoat and everyone is free to live without fear of discrimination or violence. What I think we have today, answering to this question, is the opportunity for those of us who no longer want to lean into the sectarian, the limitations of sectarian politics, who believe in the ideal pluralism, to enter into these action network spaces to build an alternative to the nihilism, the siloing, and the political violence that is being excused in our society right now. This is our choice point, and that's why I'm here today, to put my support around solutions, not walls.
I want to pick up on something you said, which is often we describe ourselves in the community as the firefighters, and we've certainly had a lot of fires to put out, but ultimately we need to be in the fire prevention business and not just the putting out of fires business. And nothing is more critical than building relationships, as you've said, to ensure each community's long-term survival and ability to thrive in this country. So thank you for all of your efforts, and we look forward to partnering with you on this. Amy, I'm teeing you up for the final softball, which is what's at the core of the Action Networks. Can you tell us a little bit more about how these Action Networks will be that proactive solution to mobilize our communities and the specific issues that the networks will focus on in the months ahead?
I could not agree more. This is about how we actually prevent these fires in the first place. And as Eric described, it's about building those relationships, building those coalitions, bridging across differences in this moment to find the places of shared interests, shared values, shared future at a time when all of us are in deep pain, are in deep fear, and know that there are extremists and bigots coming for all of us. And so that really is the bread and butter of what we're here to do, to get these action networks off the ground and start mobilizing together. And I'm so excited about that. Our JCPA team over the last few months, me, Karen, Rory, we've been out there talking to Jewish communities, leaders, Jewish community relations councils who we work so closely with, rabbis, local Jewish communities, regular people who've informed what we're putting out today through these action networks, providing a mechanism, a space for us to come together with partners across diverse communities and advocate for the policies and the progress that we know are inherent to Jewish safety and to the safety of each and every community and our democracy. And this is all the more urgent at a time when the loudest voices are advancing zero-sum frameworks. They're pitting us against one another. They're telling us there's only so much pie, when we all know that there's enough pie to go around, and we're safest when we're in deep relationship and coalition with one another. And so for me, the pain, the grief, the isolation so many of us are feeling after October 7th is not proof of failure for this framework, for this concept. It's proof of need to invest more deeply, more strategically, more deliberately in how we do this. And so the action networks are that. And it's going to include mobilizing for federal legislation, advancing key state and local policies and bills, sharing communications and advocacy tools and resources, model programming, so much more, so that you can take these opportunities, bring them to your local community, and build the relationships, the bridges, the networks that we need. What that looks like specifically, our Protecting Democracy Action Network, which I'm so thrilled is co-chaired by, as you saw earlier, friends Evan Goldman down in Broward County JCRC and Corey Shapiro from the JCPA board. We're coming together around 4 key priorities: voting and civil rights, including the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act on the federal level, which is going to protect and enhance the Voting Rights Act at a time when we know voter suppression is skyrocketing, as well as state level voting rights acts. We're also coming together to fight book bans, curriculum challenges, these broader assaults on learning, on what we can talk about, targeting so many communities, the Black community, the LGBTQ community, and even in certain cases, book and curriculum bans that have led to the banning of Holocaust-related books and lessons in certain schools. And as Ty, you know better than anyone how we can navigate other curriculum challenges where sometimes anti-Semitic and Israel-related issues crop up in these conversations. Election protection, civic engagement, mobilizing with our partners across a number of organizations to make sure we not only show up and vote in our elections, but that we're engaged civically, because a more engaged electorate means a stronger democracy. And countering disinformation and extremism at a time when it is skyrocketing. providing communities with tools, media and digital literacy, advocating for policies to combat the proliferation of disinformation and hate on social media. A number of you joined us for a webinar we did a few months back with our friends at the Center for Countering Digital Hate. How we continue to resource parents, teachers, educators, average people to be smarter and more discerning consumers of the news so that we can fight back against this rising tide of extremism and disinformation. And on our Combating Hate and Bigotry Action Network. So much of this is rooted in the framework we've been talking about, but the fight against anti-Semitism is the fight for all communities' safety and democracy. So too are all communities' safety and our democracy inherent to Jewish safety. So we'll be mobilizing around robust implementation of the historic U.S. national strategy to counter anti-Semitism, which I will say among its 4 pillars, one is actually building cross-community solidarity, as the second gentleman referenced earlier. Bills like the Countering Anti-Semitism Act, which would move that legislation forward, move that strategy forward. Bills like the new bill introduced just this week to dramatically expand funding for the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Ed, which would ensure that violations of Jewish students' rights and all students' rights are sufficiently investigated and held accountable on college campuses. And we're also mobilizing for LGBTQ rights and safety, because we know that this is inherent to the safety of all of us at a time when we are seeing dehumanizing policies, dehumanizing rhetoric targeting the trans community, so many others. Advancing racial justice in all different forms, recognizing that, as Eric has discussed, recognizing in so many ways that that anti-Semitism, white nationalism, white supremacy are inextricably linked. Immigrant rights. We know so much of this invasion and replacement rhetoric we're hearing has led to dehumanizing policies and attacks on immigrants, refugees, and again, it makes each and every one of us unsafe. And we know in a post-October 7th world that we're not alone in our fear and pain. As has been referenced, we've seen rising Islamophobia and anti-Arab hate. JCPA proudly mobilized over 150 Jewish organizations in October to speak out against Islamophobia and anti-Arab hate, and we are all required to call it out in all of its forms. Improving hate crime prevention and reporting, including through the Improving Reporting to Prevent Hate Act. Criminal justice reform, which has always been so central to JCPA's work, we know is crucial at this moment. Women's and reproductive rights, which are under assault in new and horrific ways on a day-to-day basis, and gun violence prevention. This is a long list of issues. We are going to be narrowing in and focusing in on specific pieces as the world requires it, because so much is on fire right now, and we need to both be providing menus of opportunity for engagement for local Jewish communities and leaders, as we are doing through these action networks, and also mobilizing nationally at a time when we know our rights, our safety, our freedoms are under attack in a way that we've never seen before. If there are specific resources that your community needs, that folks need, please let us know. We want to be hearing from you. It's your direct input that informs this work. You can email us at action@thejcpa.org, action@thejcpa.org. And more than anything right now, go to jewishpublicaffairs.org, where you can take action on a number of the priorities we talked about. You can write to your members of Congress on the Countering Anti-Semitism Act, on the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and a number of these other bills, and find model state and local policies, other toolkits and resources from JCPA, but also from the incredible list of partners who are part of this effort through our steering committees. It's all there at jewishpublicaffairs.org. And finally, when you get the video for this event in your inbox tomorrow, please share it with your friends, your colleagues, your neighbors. Let them know what we are doing. Let them know that there is a resource available to them through these action networks that fights back against the pain, the zero-sum frameworks, the extremism that has so dominated the conversation around anti-Semitism, around hate, around bigotry in this country, and instead seeks to build the relationships, the bridges that we so desperately need for our own safety and the safety and rights of each and every community right now.
Thank you, Amy. And I want to again thank both of you, both for your moral clarity, your vision, and for this exciting activism that you're inviting all of us into. So thank you both for your words. Now we're going to turn to a special message from Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, the U.S. Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism. Roll the tape.
Hi, I'm Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, the State Department's Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism. First of all, I want to laud JCPA for all the good work it's done, is doing now, and has done over years. I've long been a fan of the organization, and I think it plays such an important role in the panoply of Jewish communal life. So, Chazak v'Ematz, be strong and do more good things. I also wanted to mention to you, since I know this is a matter of great concern to so many people involved in JCPA, of how I've come now to understand and see anti-Semitism, particularly after 2 years of being in this position. And basically, of course, I would say we take a multi-layered approach. And the bottom layer is one that's evident to all of us. Anti-Semitism as a threat to Jews and the welfare of Jews and the Jewish community and those associated with the Jewish community. That's obvious, and that alone would make this a worthwhile and a logical thing for governments to fight. But what I've seen is it's so much more than just that. It's also a threat to democracy. Anybody who buys into conspiracy myth, and I don't say conspiracy theory, I say conspiracy myth, because theories can be proven. The conspiracy myth, which is at the heart of anti-Semitism, is the cornerstone of anti-Semitism, believes the Jews control, you fill in the blanks, media, government, judges, electoral process, whatever it might be. And so they've given up their trust in democracy. And the flip side is those who are attacked, who fear that government can or won't, two different things, can't or won't protect them, also have lost their trust. So it functions to really be a threat to democracy. And finally, anti-Semitism is a threat to national security and stability. It's used by foreign governments, by NGOs, by individuals who want to cast doubt on the viability of democracy, who want to cast doubt on the viability of our government stability. And they use it as a way to stir up the pot and to create doubts in the minds of citizens, create doubts in the views of others, and they use that very effectively. We've seen that done repeatedly over time in history, and we're seeing it again today. So I urge you, as you begin to think, and continue to think, you're not beginning to think, continue to think even more about fighting anti-Semitism, that you see it as something even larger than the very large threat to the Jewish community, even more significant than the very significant threat to the Jewish community, something that reaches well beyond those parameters. Again, I salute you for your good work, and I only wish I could be there with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Lipstadt. We could not agree more. Jewish safety, the fight against anti-Semitism is an issue of democracy, is an issue of national security, and is something that concerns all of us. So too is the fight for our democracy, for all community safety, an issue of Jewish safety. I'm so grateful to all of you who have joined us today. We are particularly excited for you to be a part of the action networks of this important work in the days ahead as we mobilize the American Jewish community and our allies. So as I mentioned earlier, to keep in touch and to take action, you can visit our website at jewishpublicaffairs.org, where you can support specific bills encouraging your members of Congress to sign on, where you can find resources, tools, model state and local policies, where you can support JCPA if this work excites you and you'd like to make sure we can keep doing it. Follow us on social media and continue advocating in every way, shape, and form for the policies that we know are inherent to all of our safety. Thank you for being here today, for your role in helping us build bridges and coalitions in pursuit of the shared future that we know is inherent to all of us and our democracy. Thanks so much. Have a great day.